Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ice Time. We dive into some big ideas around the NHL. I'm Mike Fink, and I'm joined by Ted Starkey, one of the regulars here. One of the regulars I have on covers the NHL, Capitals, all the good stuff. Part of the rotation. We've had him on a few times before for previous rounds. We're here to preview the Stanley Cup Final, with the final beginning tomorrow night. We're recording this Monday afternoon. Ted, how are you doing?
I'm good. It'll be an intriguing final. We'll see. Been a long and short road to get here, but we got one more round to go.
It is an intriguing final. That's the right word for it, because I think is it the best possible matchup? No. Is it the most exciting possible matchup? I don't think so either. And it's interesting because you can make the argument for both of these teams that neither is the best team in their conference, as much as they were the survivors of the fittest, or of the least injured, where also they didn't. We talked before the playoffs, and we said that the best team in the Atlantic should win the cup, and the best team in the Central should win the cup. And neither of those, what ended up happening, both those teams beat each other up, and because you don't have the 1v8, you have you have the whole divisions beating each other up, and that's what ended up happening. So I actually want to start with that, which is, does this kind of show that the playoffs or the Stanley Cup Final, the Stanley Cup playoffs are broken, or on the contrary, this is what they want, so this is what it should stay this way?
Well, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, because obviously I think the NHL wants the rivalries in the division, and they want the brackets. So even though this is a very flawed system, I mean, I pointed out that the President's Trophy winner, since they instituted the system in 2015, has never even reached the final, let alone won a cup. You look at the East, I think the team that could most have knocked Carolina out was probably Tampa Bay, and they were gone in the first round. Out West, Colorado obviously had their shot at Vegas, but they were, the Makar injury and then losing McKinnon, or, at least him getting hurt in game 3, I think killed whatever chance they had. But, I've always said the Stanley Cup, you have 3 things you need to do to win a cup. You need to have some luck and some good play in your own rounds. You need some luck and some good play out of your rounds in terms of the other series. And you have to stay healthy. And I think you've seen, both Carolina and Vegas. These are probably the 2 strongest teams in terms of record. You look at even going back, dating in the regular season, Vegas finished 7-1. I believe Carolina finished 7-2 heading into the playoffs. So both of these teams have lost less than 10 games since late March combined. So, it's certainly the 2 best teams, but, obviously you could say they've had a little bit of help along the way outside to get them where they are. That said, go ahead.
No, I was thinking that they have had that help, but there's also that, I mean, for the Hurricanes, I don't want to discredit either of these teams. That the Golden Knights, like, they're good teams. It's just that, are we getting our best product? And I think that's the interesting thing, is that we probably would be getting our best product if a few things happen. Obviously, a few things won't, which is you shrink the playoff field, you cut it from 16 to 8. That would give you the best teams in the final. You also reseed it where it's 1v8, and then you reseed every round. That's also something I don't know if they do. And the other thing is, if you win, you win, and if you lose, you lose. No overtime losses. Which, so there've been people who've put out brackets. If that would have happened, the Golden Knights would have been the 7 seed, I think, or maybe the 8. But they would have to play the Avalanche in the first round. They'd have to play a healthy Avalanche in the first round. And I just keep thinking about, because it's going to be a good matchup. It's going to probably be a good series, but my opinion is the NHL won't become a great, like, the league that the other leagues you look around, the championship series is the best series or championship game, whether it's a Super Bowl. It's everything builds up to the final. And in the NHL, it winds down. The first round's the best round. A lot of people like the first round the most. It gets really excited. And then by the final, there's minimal interest. And my opinion is that, which is that if the NHL really wants to take off and become a great league, it needs to have its best product as the final product, which I think we had the past 2 rounds. The Panthers and the Oilers, those 2 are the best teams. But you get these once in a while. With the system, you get these type of teams. I want to get your thoughts on that, because that's something that's on my mind, which is that once in a while, because you have this format, you're going to get a matchup that feels anticlimactic.
Right. And I mean, it's basically, like you were saying, it's a front-loaded playoff. I mean, like, the way the format works, it basically took the worst thing in the divisional format from the 80s, which is, basically you have a small group of teams to draw from. And then you have the worst part of the conference playoffs of the 90s, where it's basically the seeding doesn't change and you're locked into playing teams you probably, it's not necessarily the fairest to the top seeds. And I think, the last couple years, I think you've had, it's the best rounds have been in the first round. I mean, you compare the NHL and the NBA this year. The NHL's had 2 Game 7s, both involving Montreal. NBA just has 5 through the first, 3 rounds of their playoff. And normally the NHL is a better playoff than the NBA playoff. Kind of hard to say this year because, the last 2 rounds outside of Buffalo and Montreal have been pretty pedestrian. And I think, it's plugging back into this year's final. I think the thing is with Carolina, they really haven't faced a team yet that can exploit their biggest weakness. And I think Vegas hasn't played a healthy team that can exploit their biggest weakness. And I think the big question, this final round is going to be which team can exploit. Basically both teams are kind of weak on the back end. They're very similar. Goaltending is probably going to decide the series. So, but it's this year. Carolina obviously was 12-1. Vegas was 12-4. Both teams kind of rolled through their playoffs. Both teams had the biggest danger either team had in this playoff series was falling down 2 games in an overtime, which they eventually won. It happened to Vegas and Utah early in their series, in Carolina last round in Game 2. But both teams came back and then went on to win the series without losing another game. So, it'll be interesting. As I said, it's not necessarily the 2 best teams, but it's certainly the 2 hottest teams we've seen. Both very capable teams, but both, I think have weaknesses that can be exploited by the right team, and they haven't seen that yet.
And it could be the matchup that we're going to see which team is really the real good team, which one's the fraud, or which one's the phony. Basically, and you could imagine, you could picture a sweep in this series, one way or the other, and then afterwards the conversation is going to be like, well, they just weren't that good to begin with. Oh, well, they weren't that good. And that's been the story with a lot of this playoffs, which is the Golden Knights. They've taken care of some teams and we're like, all right, Utah wasn't that good, or the Ducks weren't that good. At some point, though, we do have to give credit to, and same thing with the Hurricanes, where it's, the Senators weren't that good, the Flyers weren't that good. At some point, we will have to give credit to one of these teams, and we'll find out which one to give it to. So we'll dive into on ice matchups. But before we do that, mind if I pay some bills? We'll try to pay some bills here and talk about how, part of the Hockey Podcast Network, Ice Time is presented by DraftKings. The Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and DraftKings Sportsbook, an official betting partner of the NHL, has a new customer offer. When the ice gets coldest, the best players in the world show you exactly who they are. Playoff warriors turn it up round by round, and DraftKings turn it up with them from the first round all the way to the Stanley Cup Final. Bet player props, bet live from the opening faceoff to the final horn. Every moment matters. New DraftKings customers bet just $5 and you'll get 100 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use the code THPN if you're ready for the moment. That's code THPN. Turn $5 into 100 in bonus bets instantly. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-MY-RESET. New York, call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. Connecticut, call 888-79-8777 or visit ccpg.org. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino in Kansas, wager tax pass-through may apply in Illinois. 21 plus in most states, void in Toronto. Restrictions apply. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see sportsbook.draftkings.com/promos. Limited time offer. Copyrights 2026. NHL. All rights reserved. All right, let's dive into some matchups. And I'm trying to think of where to start here. I guess with let's focus on the Hurricanes. The Golden Knights offense versus the Hurricanes defense. This is like one of the things that I'm thinking about, which is that the Hurricanes haven't really been tested yet. We just talked about how they've gone 12-1, where they've taken care of their opponents. The only game they've really had trouble with is Game 1 against the Canadiens, where they just put up 7 goals on them. So I'm wondering, are the Golden Knights, is this the type of team matchup wise that can get to the Hurricanes defense and get to Freddie Anderson?
They are. I mean, the strange thing about the Montreal series for the Hurricanes is Montreal basically painted a roadmap of how to beat the Hurricanes in Game 1 and never played it again. They basically reverted to trying to get be opportunistic and limit their shots, and that won't work. You basically have to pressure Freddie Anderson. That's what Florida did in years past. Even Montreal in game 1, they just put a lot of pressure on him. Then he eventually cracks. I mean, he hasn't seen a lot of shots, and partially the playoffs. The teams, as I said, the teams they face have been teams that match up very well with what they want to do. They want to kind of put pressure on the other teams, limit the chances against Freddie, protect Freddie. He did not have a great regular season, but obviously he's been very good in the playoffs. But, Vegas is the kind of team that probably is going to be able to put shots on Freddie Anderson. And the question is, will he be able to handle it? I think the first 2 games in the series are going to be pretty pivotal, because I think if, Vegas can get a split in Raleigh, I think it makes a much different series than, say, Carolina wins the first 2 at home, just because I think Carolina is a very difficult team to have to try to catch up against. You saw it in the Montreal series once the Canes even the series and then went ahead. Montreal really never was the same team. And I think, Vegas wants to win the series. They got to win at least one of those first 2 in Raleigh and then try to, build on that. But yeah, I do think they are a team that's capable of, able to pressure Freddie Anderson enough to get enough goals that they can put some pressure on the Hurricanes offense to match.
It's interesting because we saw the blueprint, and it's interesting because I think you know how to beat them. You need the players to do it. And I think, interestingly, you need the forwards who can, because the Hurricanes play man on man. They have a high pressure type of system where, they play their way. And when you play man to man like they do, you give up rush chances the other way once in a while. But you need to have those players, those forwards who can basically Selke caliber forwards, which I think is interesting, that you almost see this matchup as when the Golden Knights are defending, can Jack Eichel turn those chances into rush chances, turnovers into rush chances the other way? Can Mitch Marner do that? Can Mark Stone do that? Stone is not as good a skater in this series, but they have the players that can defend, it feels like, and turn that into offense. And it feels like that's the kind of series that could play out here. And I guess the question with that in mind is, if you see that, because the Golden Knights have those players that can do that, do the Hurricanes pivot? Does Rob Brind'Amour, who just runs his system and does his style, do they pivot and change what they do?
I don't really think they do, because I mean, that's one of the reasons we've seen them in the last couple of years, against a team like Florida, they never really adapted. I think, as I said, they're very good against 90% of the teams in the league. The way they play just makes life difficult for a lot of teams. Vegas may not be one of them. Certainly, I think they're quite capable of beating Vegas, but I don't think they're going to have an easy time like they did in the first 3 rounds. I mean, I thought the first 3 rounds, the toughest team that the Hurricanes could have faced was Ottawa, and Ottawa was frankly pretty terrible against them. I didn't think Philadelphia was going to be able to beat them. Montreal, obviously they won the 1 game, but I didn't think they were going to win that series either. So this is a series, I think, plus the other thing too with Carolina is what they've done differently this year is they haven't really let up when with the lead, and you have to really make sure you keep your foot on the pedal against the Vegas Golden Knights, because no team has trailed more than in the playoffs or like in the regular season than the Vegas Golden Knights and one other team in the league. They played most of their year coming from behind. They played most of the year. Look at the games against Game 3 against Colorado. They were down 3-0. Looked like the Avalanche were to climb back in that series, and they just rallied back. And that's the one thing I think the Carolina Hurricanes have to be cognizant of, because if they kind of take their foot off the gas, and if they're up 2 or 3-0, game isn't over.
And I think, like, to your point on that, is that both these teams have found the ways to win those games late, where if it's a tie game with 5 minutes left, they have the players to get the job done, whether it's Marner, Eichel, Pavel Dorofeev for Vegas, or whether with the Hurricanes, it's been Taylor Hall or Jordan Stahl or Aho, Jarvis, all the players, Nikolai Ehlers. And I think that's the interesting thing with the Hurricanes, is that they've had games go into overtime that could have gone either way. With the Canadiens, Game 2 and Game 3 went into overtime. They won both, and that swung the series. And with the Golden Knights, it's that Game 3 that I think it's the Avalanche win Game 3, and they keep their foot on the gas, and the Golden Knights don't come back and steal that one. that series might, I don't think the Avalanche win it. They're just they had nobody left, but that series probably goes 6 games. It probably wears down the Golden Knights more. And I think it almost leads into something I was thinking about as we're talking about this, which is you could picture game 1 being a 2-2 game or a 1-1 game late in the third period where the next goal kind of wins the game. Who do you think has the edge in that scenario?
I mean, I think, it's obviously Vegas has the late period comebacks, late game comebacks this year. Carolina, obviously it's game 1, will be at home. They've been, I believe it's 7 straight they won in overtime, with the playoffs. And obviously, if the games are tight, that's a huge advantage for them. I just said the difference will be, I think, how much pressure Vegas can put on Freddie Anderson. Because I think if you put a lot of pressure on Freddie Anderson, I think you're going to have to produce a lot of goals to go in the other way, because he's not going to have the kind of success he did when you're facing, 93 shots in 5 games. They're not going to get that against Vegas, and Vegas is a lot more talented up front than they've seen. The one thing I think for Carolina is this team is going to be a big jump in terms of the competition they've seen. Montreal was a 100-point team, but they also seemed really out of gas. They didn't put a lot of pressure on. This is not a team that's out of gas. This is a team with a lot of, even a guy like Jack Eichel, who hasn't put a lot of goals forward, he's gotten a ton of points because he's been able to distribute the puck well and run the offense. And I think this is a much, much different animal for Carolina. I think they're capable of handling it, but the question is, will they?
Yeah, and that's interesting because it is the first test, and I think to a point, this feels like the first test for Vegas too, because I think the Ducks gave them problems. The Ducks actually were the team that could have beaten them, that played them very well, but eventually they hit a wall, and the Golden Knights took over the series. They had a few games where their stars took over the series late, but this is really, it is the first. It's weird because it feels like the first real test. Like we're at the final, and we don't know a lot. We don't know how good these teams really are. We don't really know much about these teams. We don't know, how do they face adversity, or how do they battle back in games? We have seen that, but we haven't seen these teams that play. What happens when a series goes 6 or 7 games? I don't know. It's hard to tell. It's interesting because the way you're talking about the series, that it's the series that the Golden Knights can turn up the heat and give the Hurricanes fits, and they haven't seen that before. What if the Hurricanes win the series? How does that play out? What does that look like?
I mean, I think basically they can get the kind of game they want, which is limiting shots against and being able to take advantage of their own chances. That's what Carolina Hurricanes hockey is. They could pour a lot of shots on Carter Hart, and he's another question. I mean, I think obviously, he's kind of had a season, with everything behind him, all the controversy, and kind of he's focused on playing hockey regardless of what you think of, obviously his past. And I think he's kind of been able to focus that and channel that into on the ice and at least playing well. Question is, obviously, this is a much, much bigger stage, for him than anything he's seen before. I think the big question for both these teams is going to be how the goaltending holds up, because that was, to me, the big Achilles heel for both of these teams, and neither of these teams have really faced a lot of adversity that way, like you were saying. I mean, I think the weird thing about this year's final is usually you have a team that survived a Game 7 reach the final, and worst that either of these teams got to was a Game 6. It wasn't necessarily that close, and so you're not seeing a lot of teams, like I was saying before. You have a lot of teams that have been tested. You kind of want to see how they do, and I think Vegas will present a lot of problems for Carolina that they haven't seen, and I think Carolina presents a lot of problems for Vegas that they haven't seen. And I would put a little bit more faith in John Tortorella in being able to, obviously they've been playing a very defensive type of hockey, playing blocking shots, clogging lanes, things that we just, they frustrated Colorado in the Western Final, and I think a lot of that in the Stanley Cup Final. Obviously Carolina likes to be creative. They may not allow them to be creative, and will players like Ehlers go in the net and go towards the paint, and they won't give you that space like Montreal or Philadelphia or Ottawa did, and that's going to be the big question for me is I think both teams will have to adapt a little bit, but I think Vegas is a little bit more flexible that way than Carolina is.
It's interesting you mentioned Tortorella. You feel more comfortable with him, because that's actually one of the questions I had, or one of the things I was thinking about, which is why do you think it's really odd that people are thinking Tort's the better coach in this series. Why do you think John Tortorella has the edge over Rob Brind'Amour?
I mean, I always thought the weird thing is with Tortorella is I always thought he was a finishing coach. Like, he was a coach you hired when you're one step away from the Stanley Cup. And he never really got that after Tampa Bay. I mean, you look at some of his other stops, you look at Columbus, you look at Vancouver, and you look at some of these other spots, and they were not teams that were close to being a finals. You look at Philadelphia, same thing. He's not a guy who can build up your program. He's not a guy you bring in to say, develop players. He's a guy who can get the most out of your players that you have now in a short amount of time, because, his act wears thin. He even if he comes, obviously he's going to be a free agent at the end of this year. Even if Vegas brings him back, I can't imagine he's going to be there more than 2 or 3 years, just because he does not last with players. But what he does, he gets the most out of your players, and he plays a playoff style hockey right away. And, this is probably the perfect move for Vegas. Even though Bruce Cassidy was an excellent coach in his own right, I think that, he's a guy who can take you over the top. Like I said, they finished the season 7-1, won the Pacific, and then they've only lost 4 games in the last 3 rounds. They played very good hockey. They're playing, very good playoff type hockey. They're blocking shots, they're clogging the lanes, they're making sure they're playing the trap to be able to frustrate talented opponents like the Avalanche. And I think it's a right place, right time. He's not necessarily the best coach, but I think, with Rob Brind'Amour, obviously his players love him. He's been there forever. That said, I don't think he's the most adaptable coach. I think they play the way they want to play. And we've seen in previous years when a team presents them a challenge of changing their style, they don't do it. And they end up, obviously against Florida, against Boston, against Pittsburgh in years past, they have not adapted well to basically having to play a different style of game. And, Vegas is probably going to give them a lot of problems. I think they're quite capable team. I think they're a very good team. I'm not sure they can be flexible enough to basically take them out unless, maybe Vegas runs out of gas at some point. But, I just think it's going to be a lot more difficult for Carolina than it is for Vegas.
It's actually what's interesting when you're talking about Tortorella. I was thinking about, I actually had this conversation over the weekend with one of these scouts around the AHL. Spoiler alert, I cover the AHL. I've been on the road. There's scouts around chatting with one of them. And I was talking about how there's it's almost an art form. People talk about, it's so easy to coach a team with star players. Or if you have a studded roster, your job is easy. There's an art form to coaching with that type of team. Or sometimes it's even harder to coach those type of teams with all the egos and stars in the room and different personalities in the room to get them all together and win. And in a way, that's kind of what Tortorella is like. I think it's interesting. I was thinking of historically a comparison. I was thinking of Mike Keenan, where you bring the Rangers brought Mike Keenan in, and it was all right. It's a one and done thing. I think he was there for 2 seasons or 3 seasons, but it was the first season they didn't win the cup. But it was, you're coming in. We have a team ready to win the cup. You're going to get us over the hump and win the cup. And Mike Keenan, throughout his coaching career, it was taking good teams and putting them over the hump. International play, he had that sort of similarity. Eventually, he also had a Tortorella career where he stopped winning and all of a sudden became a retread. But it's interesting is that there is an art form to coaching that way. And I think what we're seeing with John Tortorella is that what he does is he doesn't do a lot of creative stuff. There's not a lot of X's and O's there. There's not, and I think the contrast is Rob Brind'Amour is very technical. There's a lot of detail in in the way he coaches, in the way they play. And with Tortorella, these are my star players. I'm leaning on my star players, and I'm going to get the job done with those players. If Marner's hot, he's keeping him on the ice. If Pavel Dorofeev is hot, keeping him on the ice. So, and it's not necessarily line matchups as much as these are the players that are going to get me over the hump, and that's what he does. And with Brind'Amour, it's more there is a lot of technical stuff, and it's interesting because I feel like that's actually the thing that could give the Hurricanes the edge is that Brind'Amour does have these technical things where they will, if they get into their game, if they get into the O zone, they establish an offensive zone presence, they will get their high danger shots. They will get their shots through traffic. They will get good puck movement going. And it's interesting with that in mind, if that happens, do the Golden Knights have an answer to that?
I mean, I think with both coaches, I think it's buy-in is the big thing. I mean, obviously, I think, at the end of his tenure, Cassidy kind of ran into, at some point, you don't necessarily believe in your coach. You don't necessarily believe what you're doing. I mean, you look at Vegas before the coaching change, I believe into March, I think they'd only beaten 4 teams in playoff spots all year, which is an incredible stat for a team like that. Like I was saying before, they had trailed most of their games. And I thought what you saw with Tortorella coming in is they bought in and they said, look, if we play this way, we can be successful. Obviously that happened. Same thing with Brind'Amour. I mean, Brind'Amour is obviously a long-term, they believe in him. They believe in the style that they play. I think, like, if you want to talk about technical, I think you kind of look at, or as the Hurricanes as an NFL offense, they're kind of creative. They're kind of want to let things flow. Vegas is an NFL defense. They just want to kind of wreck things. They want to wreck what you're going to do. And I think that's kind of which one will win out. Can Vegas disrupt Carolina enough for that they're not effective anymore? I mean, you look at Carolina, they're effective because they essentially play defense by playing offense. They keep you on your heels for 60 minutes so you can't generate offense against them and kind of expose their weakness. It's like, Colorado did in 2022 with Darcy Kemper in that Pittsburgh in the mid 2010s. That's how they won, even though the goaltending may not have been great, but Crosby and all those guys kept pressure on teams that they couldn't create anything against them. And now, obviously, can they do that against Vegas? It's going to be a lot tougher to do that. I mean, I think, Vegas will be very effective in trying to break up the forecheck, very effective in trying to pressure them to go in the other way. And the question is, can they rise to the occasion? Can they kind of break what Vegas is trying to do? And it's probably easier for Vegas to break what Carolina is going to do. Certainly possible, but I just think that obviously with Brind'Amour, he's kind of, he's been there so long. I mean, obviously look at his track record. Carolina's played 2 playoff wins without Brind'Amour either behind the bench or on the ice. In the last, you look at the last cup Tortorella won was the one leading into the 2004 lockout. The only cup Brind'Amour won was coming out of that lockout. So it's been a while for both of these guys. So it'll be interesting to see what they do.
Yeah, I mean, Brind'Amour as a player as well. He never won it as a coach. And Tortorella, it was 2004. And it's interesting because, it was over 20 years ago, and it was a completely different era with that. When he won it in 2004, it was like, I think before the salary cap, before the lockout. The lockout really changed hockey. It's before all that, and it was really was a different era. And Torts also was a very different coach back then. I think it's worth noting that as well, which is why I think he's actually hasn't done well since he's left Tampa, because he's changed, saying like, okay, what worked, where he's kind of not changed as much as he's been the same type of coach, but more stubborn, I guess, which is interesting.
Like I was alluding to too, I think you look at the jobs he's had since Tampa Bay. I mean, you had the Rangers when they were kind of before their stretch. He had, Vancouver, he had Columbus, he had Philadelphia. None of those teams were really anywhere near close. Yeah. And he's not a guy that's going to nurture your players. He's not going to build guys up. He's not going to take a rookie and make him a great player. He's going to take what you have and get the most out of what you have now. And I think this is the most perfect job for him because Vegas is in a position where they are as a contender, where none of the other teams, I don't think you really consider them a Stanley Cup contender. They were playoff threats, but nothing to this degree.
Yeah, and it is interesting because I was thinking like this is the best spot for him, and I was thinking in my head like, is there another if you were to take him off of Vegas and say another team were to make a coaching change, I can't think of another team that actually fits for Torts, like where he could go. That it would be all right. He could get this team to a Stanley Cup. I mean, maybe the Wild. I'm just thinking of that in my head. But anyway, I digress. In this series, do you have an X factor player on your mind? A player that we should say by X factor, because that term gets overused. Player that probably is on the 3rd or 4th line or 2nd or 3rd pair that we're not going to talk about. And then all of a sudden when the final rolls around, we're like, all right, that guy's really good. We know about that. Do you have a player in mind?
I mean, I think you just, for me, it's, I mean, even though you talk about the depth players, I think it's all going to come down to goaltending. I mean, it's, I've seen Freddie Anderson the last couple of years in the playoffs, and I think there's one type of team that can beat him, and it's a team that puts a lot of pressure on him. I think he kind of cracks under a lot of pressure, and Carolina's been very good at limiting that pressure on him. Conversely, I think Carter Hart's going to be the same way. I mean, Carter Hart has his ups and downs. Going into the playoffs this year, everyone was like, well, Vegas shouldn't have traded Logan Thompson because obviously their outlook would have been much brighter have him in that. But, I just think the goaltending is going to be paramount in the series. I mean, it always is, but I think, this is the weakness for both teams. If you want to beat Carolina, if you want to beat Vegas, you attack their goaltender. And they haven't seen that heading into this final yet. And whichever team can attack the goaltender most effectively is going to win the series.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel that way. It feels like it's almost like we're talking about the same stuff. Where it's like coaching, goaltending, and it's the same story with those things.
You look at these two teams are very similar. They're very skilled up front. They have a lot of talent. They can put a lot of shots on net. It's just which team is going to get the other team to crack. I think that's a big question in my mind.
And I think what's interesting is that if there is sort of an X factor, I'm not pointing out one player, but it does feel like the defense for both teams is going to be tested. Those second and third pairings will be tested. And which one of those can step up? Because you looked at the Hurricanes and their run, people are starting to realize how good Keandre Miller is. And he's not really an X factor anymore because, no, he's part of that Hurricanes defense that is really good. Jacob Slavin, everyone knows how good he is. He's not really an X factor. But the Hurricanes, it's going to be those second and third pairs on defense, whether it's Shane Gostisbehere or you could fill in the blank there who's on their defense, rounding out that unit. And with the Golden Knights, you have Shea Theodore, you have Noah Hannafin, you have Rasmus Anderson. They're all the top four players, but that's kind of decide the series as well. All right, I guess good time to make predictions. I have a feeling I know what you're gonna pick, but who wins, how many games, and why?
Well, I think, I think it's gonna be a pretty good series. I do think Vegas is going to win in 6. I do think, Carter Hart is not a top level goaltender, but I think he's going to outplay Freddie Anderson, which I think is going to be enough. Like we were talking about, you were talking about the defense having to take away. Vegas would probably have to take away Carolina's time and space. If they do that, Carolina's going to have a very tough time. But I just think I don't think Carolina has seen a team like Vegas. And I don't think Vegas is a great match. I mean, I think, ironically, Colorado might have been a better match for Carolina because they're more likely to play the style that the Canes want to. I don't think Vegas will play a style that the Canes want to at all, and they're going to have to adapt, and I'm not sure they'll be able to do that. I do think it'll be a better series than we've seen the last couple rounds, but I do think Vegas will win their second cup since 2023 in 6 games.
I wanted to pick the Hurricanes. I was leaning towards the Hurricanes slightly. A part of me still is. And I think I was thinking of this series as a Hurricanes in 5 type of series. I want to say it would be great historically if Hurricanes won in 7, because 20 years ago they had they were in the final, they won in game 7. It was the Cam Ward, obviously. I know he won the Conn Smythe. It was all those things. It was like a real big run for them. It was all that excitement. So I think that would be cool to see happen. I'm thinking there's a lot, and it's funny because it's one of those I could see any scenario, and I don't know which one to pick, but I'll go Vegas in 7. I think that's the one I'll go with. I could see Vegas in 5, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to be like, oh yeah, Vegas in 5. They just destroy it. Vegas in 7. Of course, my rooting interest as someone who's a neutral fan is to see Game 7 go into overtime. The fun fact about that is that there have only been 2 Game 7. The best ending in all of sports is a Game 7 game winner. Basically, Game 7 goes into overtime. The next goal wins or loses the series. There's been plenty of those in the playoffs. There's actually been, I believe, 1 this year. There was 1 last year. It was the Winnipeg Jets played the St. Louis Blues. That went into Game 7. That went into overtime. But anyway, it happens once in a while. But it happened, I think, did it happen in the second round this year? Oh yeah, it did. Montreal Canadiens. They played the Sabres. The Montreal Canadiens played the Sabres. Game 7 went into overtime. Alex Newhook scores. That's the best ending in sports, best possible ending. So I root for that. It's very unlikely. It's only happened twice in Stanley Cup Final history, by the way, 1950, 1954. But fun fact. But I don't think that's going to happen as much as I'd like to see that happen. But I'm going Golden Knights in 7, and it'd be a little anticlimactic. Might be a little anticlimactic of a Game 7, but it would be a fun. I think it's going to be back and forth series. I think you're going to see the Hurricanes are going to come out strong. The Golden Knights are going to adjust. The Hurricanes will take one game back, and then the Golden Knights win in 7. One more round of predictions. I guess you could group this together, which is your Conn Smythe winner, and then an award that doesn't exist, but I'll make it up because I think it should. And I'm the only one who does think this award should exist. Let's call it the Sam Reinhart Award based on last year, which is the final MVP. As in, if you could pick an MVP from this series and only this series, which one would you pick? So we got 2 awards, so you could put them together in the same group if you wanted to, but your Conn Smythe pick and then your finals MVP.
Well, if Vegas wins, it's going to be very interesting because obviously you have Mitch Marner would be the one guy. And obviously with the Toronto media this year with Mitch Marner, it's been an interesting relationship. And, the other guy would be Carter Hart, who also, obviously with his background, are writers going to give him the award? Probably not, even if he's, say, deserving. I would say the most likely would be Mitch Marner, just because I think there'll be enough votes. Otherwise, I think the best player in the series may be Jack Eichel. I think, like I said, he has not put the goal totals up that we expect of him, but he's really driven this offense. And I think if they're going to win, they're going to need him to be really good.
I think it's interesting because I had the same thought process, which is the idea behind it's interesting is that I've never voted on the Conn Smythe, but the way it works, I haven't also been to a game, but the way it works, they hand out the votes. And during the third period, I think with 10 minutes left in the third period, the media relations people, they hand out the votes and you write down your top 3 in order, and you can write contingencies, which is if someone scores an overtime winner or if someone scores a hat trick in the game, in the clinching game, then I want them to be first. But you rarely have the contingencies work out where you can that person ends up winning the award. So I think, for example, last year, Sam Reinhart scored 4 goals in Game 6 to put the series away, and I think lead the series in goals at the end of the day, but nobody saw that coming. Everyone kind of had their ballots already filled out for the playoffs and not the final. So I'm going to go, Mitch Marner, I think will be the Conn Smythe winner, which would just be interesting to see. I think everyone gets their ballot. I think he'll be second or third and he'll be on everyone's ballot. And then I think he'll be first on a few, which will allow him to win the award. And then for the playoff, this series, the MVP of this series, I think there's 2 that come to mind, which is Jack Eichel, I think, for Vegas, if he wins the series, if they win, because he's just going to be that matchup nightmare and he's just going to take over the series. And then the other for Vegas is Brett Howden, who's scored 11 goals. If there's a Game 5 or a Game 6 where he scores 3 or 4 and puts the series away, that's almost the MVP of the series. So but I think it's going to be a fun series, and it's really going to be exciting to watch. And let's hope that it lives up to the hype that we've had for it, although I don't think we've overhyped it as much. But all right, that's all we got. Ted, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day. Thank you for joining. It's always fun. At this time of year, you're like wrapping up, like, wow, we made it this far, and we've had you on plenty of times. But in case people are listening for the first time, any plugs, anything you're working on, let us know.
Yep, just working with Hockey Hot Stove. Obviously, it'll be interesting. Once this ends, only a couple of weeks till the draft, and we got that. And obviously, it'll be a very interesting offseason with the cap going up. Not necessarily a lot of good unrestricted free agents, and so there should be a lot of trades starting with late June in Buffalo with the draft. So it'll be interesting. And then I'll be covering all that and probably doing a lot more Capitals next season.
Yeah, it is that time of year where everything's coming to, I don't know what to say, to a close, but it is that feeling of like everything's wrapping up now, and then free agency July, although it's going to be an interesting free agency, and then a few weeks into July, there's not much going on. That's how it works. This is what we live for. We don't get much sleep now, but we'll make it up in a few weeks. But that for now, that's all we got. We hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, which you can do to Mike Fink Hockey Writer. Please do that. Really help if you did. Check out all the great content also at the Hockey Podcast Network, all the other podcasts that are there. Check all that stuff out. And we hope you enjoyed, and tune in next time for another great episode. Thank you.